Hello and welcome back to the 2020 CBI annual conference from ITN here in London. This afternoon we're going to start by talking about building back better, about whether businesses can be trusted to build back better. I'm joined by Josh Hardy, the Deputy Director General of the CBI, by Francis O'Grady, who is the General Secretary of the TUC, by Ben Page, the Chief Executive of the pollsters Ipsos Mori, by Helen Lamprell, who's the Director at Vodafone UK. Helen, thanks for joining us. And by Julian Richer, who is the founder of Richer Sounds and, of course, well known for the power behind the Good Business Charter. I hope this is going to be a really interesting discussion about two things, if you like. Our vision for the future, our vision for how businesses build back from this, but essential to that is the trust that we've got in business. To have that conversation and to make sure that everyone, all CBI members, are properly engaged in it, please do weigh in with your questions. If you send them in, they'll get sent along to me, and I'll make sure that they're part of the conversation that we're going to have. I hope by now you've seen that you can ask those questions on the conference platform. So thank you for joining us. Please be a part of this conversation. But I'm going to start, if I can, with you, Josh. I realise that over the last 5 years, you sat at this intersection of business and policy and politics, and trust is central to that. It's a perennial, isn't it, trust in business, but never more so now when we're thinking about how we come out of this, what economy, what country comes out of it. So will you give us your sense of, I suppose, A, what you think Build Back Better means, and whether or not you think there's the public confidence, the public trust to deliver it?
Yeah, I mean, and I think you're right. Firstly, thanks. Great to be here. This has been an ongoing conversation, not just over the last 5 years, but since the beginning of business, really. It's been really interesting talking to businesses through the pandemic. So many, right from the very beginning, said this is going to be a major economic shock. It's going to really stress us. We need to start planning now for how we come out the other side. And to your point about what that means, we could debate that for hours, but I'll actually use the TUC phrase. Good green jobs close to home. I mean, I think that's a good précis for what a lot of businesses think. It's been really tough, of course, that goes without saying. But some of the things we've seen businesses doing through the pandemic, I think, give real cause for hope. You've had, first of all, businesses stepping up to do things they don't normally do. The ventilator challenge, PPE, providing food in communities, innovating, all of those things, which A, has been critically important, but B, I think has shown society that there is another side to business. You've also had the fundamentals. Day in, day out, working to protect jobs, to deliver products and services, to keep life moving on. And actually, it's important to remember that that is one of the core purposes of business and be reminded how important that is. But I think the thing that shines through from the conversations is actually one of the things that is at the heart of that trust relationship, and that's the relationship with employees. We set a target a couple of years ago at the CBI through our polling that you want 80% minimum of employees saying they have a good relationship with their employer. In February, that went up to 84%. So it's exceeded the target. And I think, and it'd be interesting to hear from Francis, because of course there have been challenges. But the number of businesses where the dialogue with employees has changed, because they've had to have a more emotional conversation. How can I keep you safe? How can we make flexible working work for you? How are you comfortable coming back into the office? For managers, often that's a very different type of conversation. And in many cases, it's strengthened that relationship. So We'll come on to, what might happen in the future, and we've got some really interesting data around that. But I think the experience we've had during the pandemic gives cause for hope, and the commitment from business, I think, is very, very powerful indeed.
It's really interesting, Josh, isn't it? Talking about businesses having that emotional conversation. We heard yesterday from Laxman at Reckitt Benckiser, who described himself as the chief engagement officer of RB because he was engaging with people. The one thing I wonder is whether or not in this sort of second phase, whether or not you're beginning to discern a certain weariness. I'm really aware that in March, April, there was quite a bit of blue sky thinking. This is a pause, it's a chance for us to reset. Now people are facing, the next lockdown or different tiered lockdowns in different parts of the UK. And as Carolyn said yesterday, there's not as much gas in the tank. And I wondered whether or not you see a change in the appetite for building back better.
Not a change in the appetite, but I think put yourselves in the shoes of a business leader this week, just this week, or in the next week. You've got the beginning tomorrow of a second lockdown. You've got a fascinating but really important US election. And in theory, in a week's time, you've got a resolution on Brexit, which has to be a deal. Because the stress of no deal would be inconceivable with all we've got going on. So yeah, there is a lot to focus on. But again, what you've heard it in this conference. When you talk to business leaders, yes, it's difficult now, but their job is to think about the future. Their job is to hold those values, to hold that optimism and ambition. And that is one of the things that businesses do so brilliantly. So in the polling that we launched the conference with, which we did with Ben at Ipsos Mori, 2/3 of businesses absolutely committed to increasing their investment in net zero.
Really?
The same number, absolutely looking at D&I, particularly with this new flexible opportunity for flexible working. Not for all of the economy, obviously, but for those people who can work at home. Really strong commitments, increase in community investment. All of those things, they have not diminished. This was recent polling. So I think this is what businesses and individual leaders want to do. Get through the next few weeks, keep that resilience in place, because then we'll have the capacity to build that better.
Josh, thanks. And Ben, I'm going to come to you in a bit, because I think that it'd be really interesting to drill into some of that polling on business sentiment, at trust and the commitment to those bigger ideas. But Francis, if I may, firstly, let me just note that there's quite a thing when you're at a CBI conference where the CBI is using the phrases of the TUC.
World we live in,
2020 is an unusual year in many ways. But Francis, can you tell me, I think there are many working people who are understandably very fearful about what's coming in the economy, and for whom, bluntly, the idea of building back better is just on the verge of wishful thinking. And I wondered what you think build back better means for working people.
Well, without doubt, working people have had a really rough time, as everybody has. And I think we've learned a lot through this pandemic, haven't we? We've learned, and I suspect businesses have learned too, that we really need some kind of framework from government to plan as best as we can for certainty and security. So, it's not okay to get a call on a Sunday morning with the deadline for the Sunday night to come up with health and safety standards covering 7 industries. I think business and unions shared that frustration. Similarly, on the extension of the furlough scheme, in another month, are we going to be in the same situation? Wouldn't it be better to give some kind of sense that that scheme will continue if we haven't got the virus under control? That would allow us all to plan. And I think we've learned about the value of work too, haven't we? Very often key workers were described as unskilled. Nobody would say that now, or they shouldn't. But we've also learned that many of the people doing the most important jobs in society are paid the least and are very often on insecure contracts. So I think that appetite to do things differently, not to go back to business as usual, but to win that new deal, I think that's there. And I would also just say, I think, I just want to pay tribute, actually, to Carolyn Fairbairn. She's very often described as the first woman leader of the CBI. I think she should be described as one of the best leaders of the CBI. And I think it was proof that it is, even when you're representing different interests, as unions and employers may be, that we can work together in good faith, as we did on the furlough scheme, short-time working scheme, and many other initiatives, including Carolyn supporting our call for a National Recovery Council so that we get around the table on equal terms, and let's respond to that public appetite for a nationwide effort to get something good out of this awful experience and to build back better. I would say the TUC has set out quite detailed plans about what we think that means. We're can-do people. We like to come up with practical solutions about how to protect jobs, but also how to create new, good, green jobs, exactly as Josh said, in the parts of the country that need them most. How we reform our welfare and public services, because frankly, again, another lesson, they're going to need to be resilient and agile in the future. We must have learned that in some areas, cutting them to the bone had a real impact on lives and livelihoods, our ability to cope with this pandemic. And of course, I would agree, we've got these big challenges ahead, Brexit, technology, climate change, but let's not forget inequality. You know, we saw the rise of Black Lives Matter as a movement. We've seen what's happening to young women, most likely to be at the front of the queue for job losses. This has got to change. I think there's a shared appetite for more equality, and one way to get that, I would argue, if you look at those graphs on the rise of inequality and the fall of collective bargaining coverage, then you must see that link, that unions have a key role to play in ensuring fairness at work. And I think many, many employers want that, and they don't want to be undercut by the cowboys who treat people badly. So we do need new rules. Those rules have to be global as well as national. We've got to have corporates like Amazon playing by the rules. They've done very well out of this crisis for obvious reasons, but they need to pay their fair share into the pot too.
Francis, can I ask you, I mean, I'm sure many CBI members will know, but some won't, that, you know, back in March and through April, one of the things that was a feature of working out policy as the coronavirus came into the UK, or swept into the UK, was the work that, as you say, you and Carolyn Fairburn did, the TUC and the CBI did with Treasury, helping to inform the shaping of the furlough scheme and then updating it, and some of the access to finance and loans too. I'm going to push my luck here and say, do you think there's a way that kind of practice of working together, the TUC and the CBI, can be applied to some of the big problems that in recent years have essentially pitted you against each other? So, for example, inequality within companies. The question of the skills gap and who pays for the upskilling, or I hate that word, sorry, but the improvement to skills of people across the UK. Do you see a path to actually doing something constructive out of this that might continue the pattern that started in the spring?
I do, and I don't think that way of working should just be for a crisis. You know, in many other countries, it would be absolutely mainstream, absolutely expected that the heads of the CBI and the TUC should be in there with the Chancellor, figuring out how we can do both, how we can support business, but also protect working families. And, you know, that breakthrough in Britain, really, to create a scheme that, of course, provided financial support and loans for business, but also ensured that at least a whack of that support should be through wage packets in order that workers were able to see some direct gain in protecting their livelihoods. That, again, is mainstream elsewhere, but it was a first for Britain. I feel pretty passionately that I'm afraid, although generally in life I'm an optimist, I think we are going to be living with these challenges for some time to come. I don't think it's going to be, as we even saw on switching production to ventilators, politicians can make an announcement, but there's a lot of work that goes into making that happen. And I think it will be the same with the vaccine. It will take time. So I think we need to normalise the idea that you don't have to agree on everything. You can represent different interests, but you can always find common threads.
Right.
We found them in terms of the value that I think is there in the public, is there amongst business leaders and unions to get a better deal for our key workers. It's wrong. 2 million of them are on the national minimum wage. Frankly, I think that's a disgrace. We can do something about investing for the future and mapping out that vision of healthy and vibrant, prosperous towns and cities right across the UK with good, satisfying jobs, skilled jobs that people can feel proud of. We can role in the world, I think, too. Trade is going to be big this year as well.
Frances, I'm going to come back because I want to talk a little bit about leadership into 2021 and come back to you on that. But if I might, I'm going to come to Helen Lamprell at Vodafone. But Helen, I fear this says more about what it is to be a man of my age, but I find it hard to figure out how to do two things at once. And I look at companies like Vodafone that are dealing with, a massive change in working habits, all of the economic pressures that are coming with this pandemic. And yet at the same time, there are these agenda items that are the environment, social justice, the health, the mental health of colleagues in the wider community. It seems like there's just an enormous to-do list. And I wonder what you see inside a company like yours about the priorities and the ability just to get through all of those things.
Well, actually, I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. What we saw during the first wave of the crisis was that companies like ours who supported remote working, flexible working, were able to pivot their workforces very, very quickly to doing that. We were lucky, even our retail colleagues, we could get doing web chat and things like that to support our customers. So if you put those things in place for industries like ours, actually we can function really well. The flip side of our business, the bit that most people know about, is the consumer-facing side of our business, but we also have a very large enterprise side of our business, and we support, for amongst other companies and organisations, we support the NHS 111 line. So obviously it was incredibly important for us to protect our network operations centres to make sure that those continue to work when the entire country goes from commuting around the place to working from home. That puts big stress on the network. It meant that places like Canary Wharf, which are typically incredibly busy, suddenly become not busy. And in fact, that connectivity is dispersed around the place. But if you do your planning right, then you can deal with these things. I think the immediate crisis for companies like ours was a lot of work, and our people were amazing. And I want to totally echo the words that have been said so far. The crisis has in many ways been a brilliant opportunity for us to work so closely with all of our employees, with our engineers, with our retail staff, with our contact centre agents to serve our customers. And I think that's something you can see in lots of different places.
Can I ask you... Sorry, Helen, forgive me for interrupting. I just wanted to ask you about that, though, because at the heart of what we're talking about, the idea of an economy, a country that comes out with a set of ambitions for business that are in many ways healthier, critical to that is a set of understanding between people. And I just wanted to know from you, within Vodafone, whether or not the experience of more people remote working has meant people are more out of touch or out of sync with each other, or actually have a better understanding of shared interests.
I think it's a bit of both. I think when you take teams that already know each other, actually it can be quite funny. Like at the moment, you can see my house, and that's a bit weird. But also it enables people to comment on things, people's cats walking in and out of screen, people's dogs, conversations you wouldn't normally have been happening. But people really like seeing each other. And so I think there's a lot of positivity about working from home. I think coronavirus has taught us that people can work from home much more than perhaps some people understood in the past. However, I think we really need to be careful as we go forward that we understand that people are social animals and human interaction is important, and that, that power of seeing people in real life is really important. So I think as we go back, we've got to balance both the positive of not having a long commute and the flexibility it gives people so we can recruit and other companies can recruit from parts of the country that we typically couldn't have recruited from in the past, which is a tremendous opportunity to help in the levelling up agenda. But we also need we get people together, because it's one thing to take a team that's fully functioning and make them remote. It's another thing to create the glue and the sense of connectivity longer term if you don't physically see each other.
Well, Helen, first, I love the way you answer that, because you're right. I hadn't thought about the opportunities for hiring in different places in a really substantial way and levelling up. But I also really appreciate you being quite so honest about how interesting it is to look into other people's houses. We haven't yet seen a guest appearance from your cat, but even as I was talking to Frances O'Grady there, I was looking over her shoulder at the cup in her kitchen thinking, I wonder whether Frances O'Grady won that cup, and if she did, what for? Right, but we're going to come back to that in a moment, if we might, Francis. I'm going to come to Julian Richer. Many people are going to know you, Julian, because they shop at Richer Sounds, and Julian's, of course, the founder of Richer Sounds. But they're also probably going to know you, and forgive me if you blush a bit, but you were the person, of course, who became incredibly well known as a businessman for giving away the wealth and the shares that you had in Richer Sounds, giving them to employees, these £1,000+ plus bonuses for all of the people who'd worked there. And the reason I mention it is because I think people are very wary of business people kind of talking about values, giving, especially chief executives, especially ones that have done very well. And I just wanted to sort of tee that up, because you are a businessman who put your money where your mouth is. You then went and set up this thing, the Good Business Charter. And I want to hear a little bit about what it is. I think some people will know it, some people won't, but also how well it's working. What you're actually finding on the Good Business Charter initiative, who's taking it up, who's following through.
So thank you for having me today, James. Tiny correction, I didn't give the shares to the staff. The shares are transferred into employee ownership trust, and the price is paid for those shares. But I did give my staff a nice thank you bonus to celebrate that. The Good Business Charter, it's an accreditation scheme. And I thought 3 reasons I did it. And the first one is that I think there are a lot of great businesses out there, hopefully a lot looking in today, and members of the CBI, and running great businesses, and they don't get the recognition they deserve. So that's the first thing. We read the papers, don't we, about all the horror stories, and the public think we're all nasty and horrible. So I wanted to give people recognition. I think they deserve that. Secondly, I wanted to move the dial. There's another group of business people who think they're doing a great job, and maybe they're a bit deluded. And we have 10 criteria which are mandatory, and so maybe they're ticking 6 or 7 or 8 boxes. I wanted to move them down the line a bit, and that would make me incredibly satisfied and happy, because I think it would make a massive difference to the country, actually, if thousands of businesses signed up to what we're trying to do. And the third reason I did it is that the public are angry and frustrated, and of course they want to support good businesses, but they don't know who they are, because the bad businesses don't say, hello, we're bad, don't come to us. So the third reason I did it, to act as a signpost, a third-party signpost, matching up the public with businesses that deserve their trade. So I'm helping businesses and I'm helping the public, hopefully, and that's the plan.
And what do you see, Julian, in terms of the take-up from businesses? Is it a certain kind of business that is saying to you, Julian, this is brilliant, I'm in, and quietly there are a whole bunch of other businesses that, if you like, walk on the other side of the street?
OK, so a few answers to that. So first of all, the timing was incredibly bad. We launched on February the 1st.
Yes.
And I'm here today to talk about this scheme. Everyone's saying, my God, I'm closing my business down tomorrow. What an idiot. I'm not interested in that. I'm just interested in survival. So I get that completely. Other people, I met the guy who runs Capita that have had a tough time. Jonathan Lewis, who went there as a new leader, loved what I was talking about. We met in a cafe around the corner here. He said, I want to be the first person that signs up to that. And he kept his word. So we've had a massive cross-section of interest from really big companies like that, and Deloitte and the Trustees Savings Bank, and some really small businesses and some great charities, because we don't care about size, and we welcome charities as well. So that's been fantastic. But inevitably, the more I get out there and talk about it, and the press we get, and when people have got time to think about the future, then I hope they're going to get what I've been talking about. Now, there are other accreditors. Can I just quickly mention? There are other schemes out there, okay, and we applaud them all, okay, but we also believe ours is the best, not least because we've got some terrific people on our board from the TUC and the CBI, and we're very grateful for their help and wisdom. And so there are three reasons why we think ours is better than other schemes. First of all, with ours, you're either in or out. So we've got 10 criteria, and you have to pass them all. Now, there are other schemes out there. If you get 50%, oh, you're in, mate, you know. And that's no good, because you might pay your tax, but if you're not paying the real living wage, you know, we would not allow that. So that's really important. The second reason we like ours is it's really easy to sign up. Not months of admin and bureaucracy. We're all too busy as business managers, so it takes less than an hour to tick the boxes on the basis that you meet the criteria. And if you don't meet them, but you want to meet them and you want to commit to that, we will help you over the line in due course. And the third reason we like it is it's really good value for money. So I'm funding it, of course, the launch of it, which I'm happily doing. So it's free to join. The first year subscription's free. And thereafter, we're talking about £1 per FTE per year, which, you know, in the immortal worlds of Gerald Ratner is substantially less than the price of a prawn sandwich.
And Julian, forgive me, I'm not sure I'm allowed to do this, put you on the spot, but the 10, can you rattle through?
Oh my gosh.
At least some of them?
Yeah, 5 of them are to do with colleagues, as we call them, workers. Really important to me. So paying the real living wage, not penalising for sickness. I mean, there are companies in this country today that will fire you if you're ill, legitimately ill, not shirkers and not liars. These are absolutely appalling. We're talking about, I mean, I'd like to see zero-hour contracts banned, those that are unilaterally imposed on people. Some people like them, that's fine. But we're not actually banning them, but we're asking for decent a contract, you know, 2 weeks of notice of the hours you're going to do, and if we cancel that, we give you the money anyway. We're talking about worker representation in the boardroom. I'm not talking about necessarily unions, but I think workers, of course, should be represented. I'm talking about D&I policy that makes sense. I'm talking about, I'm just going to try and get through them. I'm talking about environmental commitment. I'm talking about consumer commitment. I'm talking about prompt payment. I'm talking about sourcing, and I'm talking about paying tax. So I got to tell you. You got me worried there, James. You got me worried.
I was nervous as well. But listen, I'm going to come back and talk a little bit, because I want to talk really to all of you a little bit about how companies and organisations deliver on the talk, right? Actually walk the talk. So I want to talk about that. But I just want to go to Ben, because Ben, you know, the CBI, as Josh mentioned, you know, kicked off on Monday with actually some really interesting data on, I'm not saying what businesses are thinking, but what the businesses you spoke to are telling you about attitudes within the companies amongst employees. What are they saying about trust and priorities? Ben, sorry, I can't hear you. Let me just hold on 1 second. I'm just going to check. Could you hear? I'm just going to double check that we can. Ben, forgive me. We've lost you, but we're going to come back to you in 2 seconds. Francis, I'm going to. Did you win that cup, by the way, for extraordinary sporting endeavour?
Okay, I'm going to confess I'm an Arsenal fan. So that's such a good... Ben's going to be fed up. Well, Ben is gagged, I can say this. But the cup is my son's, and it's a football league, Sunday League Cup.
By the way, can I say, I thought that's incredibly honourable of you to say that, because I'd given you a long enough gap that you could have come up with sort of, you know, NASA Astronaut of the Year or something extraordinary. So well done for that. But Francis, I want to pick up on the sort of the points that Julian raised and that Helen talked about, which is cultural change in companies. Central to that is leadership. You see it at the TUC too. What do you think you're looking for now when you talk about setting a new direction, or everyone talks about setting a new direction for business? What are you looking for in terms of the leadership of those companies?
I think this is the rub, because although I'm looking forward to what Ben says, and I'm pretty sure that perceptions have improved over this pandemic for most, we've also seen some chances, haven't we, using the pandemic as an opportunity to sack and rehire on worse terms and conditions. And we saw in Leicester how bad practice there, in one workplace, health and safety wise, can risk shutting down a whole city. So, the jury's still out. And I think the risk for us all is a kind of cynicism about people talking the good talk, but where's the delivery? And can I really see a difference in my pay packet or in the opportunities of my young adult son or daughter, what kind of job they're going to go into? So it's going to take more than words. I am so enthusiastic about Julian's attempt to build this new coalition, which I think is what is at its heart. That there are plenty of decent employers out there, but let's hear from them and let's see them sign up to a set of actions that will make a practical difference to people's working lives and the way that companies are run. But I do also believe we've got to tackle the chances, and because they do drag everybody down. And the only way I can see of doing that is that you do have to have a good rules-based system, so that decent companies can't be undercut by the bad. And that's got to include, in my book, corporate governance reform. Right. It seems crazily old-fashioned that there is no worker voice on the board. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want that expertise inside the boardroom?
Francis, thanks. I'm going to go. I'm hoping that I can hear from Ben. Ben, can we hear you now?
Me too. I don't know. I hope this works.
I think there's some very cruel but pointed metaphor in the silencing of a pollster on the day of the U.S. election. I'm sure that I'm sure something is at work there. But Ben, why don't we, before we come to that, and maybe we'll have a moment of that at the end of the conversation. Sure. Do you want to just talk us through what you saw in the polling that you've done with the CBI?
Sure. So what it shows is that actually, as we've already seen, business has pivoted very successfully, and a partnership between workers, colleagues, whatever we want to call them, and boards across Britain. We saw in the first lockdown, actually 70 to 80% of workers were positive about how their business had responded to the crisis. It's allowed leaders using this technology, when it works, to communicate directly with people that they probably couldn't see very often beforehand. And I think that's one of the things. Combine that with what we saw on Black Lives Matter during lockdown, with the highest ever concern about race relations in Britain. And then you can see in the poll of CBI members real interest in doing more on inclusion and diversity, and as with the public, a real commitment, despite all the pressures, the looming recession, to doing more on reduced carbon. You can see a positive future somewhere ahead where we have less travelling, a better work-life balance, a more redistributed Britain, and investing in things that matter. And even before the crisis, it's fair to say more people trusted business than the government, and actually even more people trusted Francis O'Grady. They trusted trade union leaders, but even more than business leaders. But what we've seen during 2020 is a rise in the proportion of people who want business leaders like Julian to speak up. It's gone from 62% to 68%. And so maybe, just maybe, there are some positives to come out of all of this pain that we have gone through in 2020.
And Ben, how much do you see those results, and I see the direction that you're talking about, how much do you see those results being very uneven? One of the real features of 2020 has been how unfair the outcomes have been, both on health and in the economy. When you look at issues like trust and like values, do they seem very different by different kinds of companies, different geographies, different sectors?
They're not actually. What's been interesting, and including on coronavirus itself, is in some ways there's less differences than I might have expected. So the young have obviously been most affected in some ways, workers and working women who have tried to look after their kids and work at home. 45% of them say their mental health has suffered during the crisis. And of course, we saw a higher mortality rate among Black and Asian and minority ethnic workers, etc., partly because of their exposure and the jobs that they were doing. But actually, overall, there's in some ways, less division in the country in terms of that aspiration than I might have expected.
And Ben, I just started talking, when we lost you, I just started talking to Francis about this gap between what businesses say and what they do, what leaders say and what they do. Can I just also ask you about what we as people say and what we do in terms of our priorities, what we say is important to us, and then the way in which we live? What do you see on that front?
Well, there's obviously in so many areas. I mean, the environment is one of the classic ones, and sometimes indeed in how we vote. We say we want one thing and we appear to vote for something else. And on the environment, we're all, we've got ongoing rises in concern despite the virus across the Western world. And yet, of course, we don't all do the things that we necessarily do. And some of that actually in both areas is because we want leadership, and leadership has been asked for in 2020. Some of it's been delivered, and we want business and government. If you're talking about carbon, for example, to act, and we believe that they can have more impact than we can as consumers. That might be right, that might be wrong, but that is the perception. And there's a huge latent permission for people in authority of all kinds to just do things now.
Right. And we've got Dido Harding joining us later on this afternoon, and we're going to be talking a bit about test and trace, or sort of test, trace and isolate, I should say. What's your polling telling you about what people say they're doing in terms of test and trace and what they're actually doing?
Well, we've got, most people support the lockdown. We've got some of the latest polling suggests that 7 out of 10 people support the second lockdown. We've seen throughout more people tending to feel that measures should be more strict than the government has put in place, than believing that they're too strict or that they're doing more harm than good. Having said that, of course, we don't have 100% compliance, but actually 3/4 of people say that they are complying, either totally or nearly all the time. So we shouldn't, although there's a very divisive sort of argument on social media about this, actually, the government, despite people being critical of the government, people support the measures that are being taken to control the virus.
Ben, thanks. I'm going to come back to you in a bit about overnight forecasts, let's put it that way.
Sure.
Helen, can I pick up on the point that Francis was making, sort of when she said, there's the rub in terms of, what companies say they're going to do and what they do. And I wonder whether you'd help us. There are lots of people joining the CBI conference. They're not working in companies as large as Vodafone, but I think all of us are trying to pick up ways that we can transfer what we say into what we do. How do you make sure that a company of your size delivers on the agenda that it advocates?
I think it's super important. I think Francis is totally right. Nobody's going to believe companies who say stuff and then don't follow through on it. And we've got a good history in terms of implementing policies around global maternity policies. We've got a domestic abuse policy, and we're now introducing a paternity leave policy, 16 weeks fully paid paternity leave, because one of the things we did see during coronavirus was the default position seemed to flip back, that women did the household chores and the childcare. So obviously we've got a bit of a reflex reaction that we need to deal with. So now it's time for companies like ours to really step in and say, right, now's time for a good paternity policy, as well as the very extensive maternity policies. So I think that's really important. But I think also companies like ours, one of the things we did during lockdown, which I think was super important, was that we started paying our small suppliers on 15 days payment terms as opposed to 30 days, right. Because clearly, cash flow is an incredibly important issue, and our connectivity is more essential than ever. So we've been less badly affected. We have been affected, but less badly affected than many others. So for us to put our money where our mouth is and say, okay, we know our small suppliers are suffering, pay them on 15 days rather than 30 days. So I do think it's important that if businesses want to be trusted, they have to do the right thing, but also talk about it, because if you just do it and never tell anybody, people don't notice. So I think it's a combination of both.
It's so interesting that, Helen, you talk about prompt payment, and I was struck by the fact that was one of the issues that Julian raised, because there is something, isn't there, about the character of businesses and the way they operate, which is really telling at a time like this. And as you say, it's difficult because there's no reason that anyone's going to know what Vodafone's payment times are unless you talk about it. Do you circulate those things within the company? Do you have meetings where you get to talk about those kinds of things so that they're shared amongst your colleagues at Vodafone?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things been fantastic is we have this radio broadcast that Nick, my CEO, started doing actually well before lockdown. We do every sort of 2 to 3 weeks with all employees can dial into it. And we actively tell people what we're doing and why, and invite them. They can ask any question they like, and it's they can do anonymous or they can put their name against it. So that always makes it quite fun. I'm sure a few of the questions are actually my colleagues taking the mick out of the rest of us, but it makes for a very nice experience. But actually, it's a great way to let everybody know what's going on, because people do care. Our employees matter so much to us, and they are the foundation of everything we do. So we want them to understand the steps we're taking, and for them to have the opportunity to tell us when they don't think we're doing enough. And that having that good feedback loop where you're hearing from people and that voice of the front line is incredibly important.
Helen, thanks. I'm going to come back, if I can, to you, Julian, because I suppose there's this curious thing. You're talking about the good business charter and values in terms of leadership in business. There's also, frankly, a really practical set of issues facing anyone in business now about how you lead your companies through this. I don't want to sort of... I can't think of a polite way of saying this, but you've run your company for quite a long time.
Say it. I'm not proud. Yeah.
So what are you thinking about kind of the leadership skills that companies need?
Yeah. Josh said, why don't you come up with some tips for the audience? Okay. And I'm really happy to. It'll only take me a couple of weeks. No, I'll keep it brief. So I think, and I've been running my business for 42 years. I'm very happy to admit to that. Since I was 19, I've been through recessions and waves and crises and nightmares and dramas. So if I may, very quickly.
Yeah, far away.
Okay, number one, bosses have got to be visionaries. Okay, it's their job to come up with a vision, but they only do that after meeting, talking to as many people as possible, visiting the business and listening to what the people around them say, particularly those at the coalface. Okay, that's number one. And if they've inherited a bad business, they've got to start again and come up with their own vision to put their mark on it. Secondly, they've got to love their staff and their customers. If they don't, they shouldn't be in business. Okay, really important. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Thirdly, they've got to be ruthless with their time. They must own their own diary, I would advise, and ruthless with their time, but leave capacity for the unexpected, because that happens every day. Okay, the next thing, they should be organised. They should write things down. If they don't write things down, they'll forget them. They should do what they say they're going to do. Okay, and they should answer their emails, because it's very disrespectful. But also, lieutenants won't get on with the job if they're waiting for an answer. So I really believe that. Rockefeller said, don't make a decision after 6 o'clock. And I'd add to that, don't make a decision after you've had a drink, because that'll also end in tears. Now, the overriding skill leaders must have, or thing to remember, is that it's all about the people. I've seen a huge difference in output from people depending on how they're treated. And this is not only your staff, it's your customers, all the stakeholders, absolutely essential. So that is the most important bit of advice I can tell you. We expect our staff to be loyal, to go the extra mile, to give great customer service, not to steal. What are we going to do for them in return? It's a two-way street. And I actually wrote a book about this 25 years ago, which is still relevant, called The Richer Way. And if anyone's interested, it's packed full of good ideas. So please buy the book, because I need the money.
OK, Julian, we're going to pretend for a short minute here that the CBI annual conference is not going on, and we're going to do just a little moment of personal therapy for me, if you don't mind.
Sure.
When you say you should answer all your emails,
yes,
I can almost hear people going, have you any idea how many emails I get, how many Slack messages, WhatsApp messages? Are you saying to me that you really answer everything?
Well, for sure. And even during lockdown, our free post was suspended. Every receipt has a free post addressed to me if customers are unhappy. And we made a big mistake, because we've now set up an email address. So every customer that's not happy can write to me. Now, I have a team dealing with those, but I still oversee them. But absolutely. And I'm not talking about fake Rolex watches and sexual dysfunction adverts. I mean, that's another story. But no, any emails that are respectfully sent to me, I promise I deal with. And yes,
and you deal with them by the end of the day?
Sorry?
And you deal with them by the end of the day?
Within 24 hours. I go to bed early because I get up very early, but we're always in 24 hours. And they've tripled during lockdown. I haven't had a day off since March. Josh said, have I listened?
I can confirm this. When I became a trustee of the Good Business Charter, Julian said, delighted to have the CBI on board, but you're only allowed in if you promise to answer every email I send you within an hour.
Well,
and he reciprocates.
At least I do it myself. But really important.
Right.
It's really important.
Well, now you're making me feel guilty, because I've got a number of questions that have come in digitally, and now I fear that we're not going to answer them within the time available to us. So I'm going to come first. There's a question for you, Josh, which I'm going to put first, if I might. which said, we've seen a small number of companies that bounce back quickly from the initial impact of lockdown, repay or announce their intention to repay furlough funds. Right? And there's a question about whether or not you think that all firms that are in that position should do that. And I suppose it gets to a bigger question about the contract that government has struck with business, or business has struck with government.
And I look, it's a great question. I think these are exceptional times. We said, I think probably in March, right in early days of lockdown, that one of the key characteristics that businesses need to show was financial fairness. We use the phrase, take only what you need. And I think if we are seeing firms, it's incredibly complicated. I mean, each firm will be thinking what lies ahead. It's very difficult to make these decisions. It's very complicated. It's up to individual firms. I wouldn't try and put any blanket rule on it. But I think those firms who are able to sit back and say, well, maybe we didn't need that money, or maybe we didn't use that money. But actually, that comes back to the state, because there's a long road ahead. And there's a basic principle that one day we'll be repaying what we've used now. So the more that we can come together and help on that, I think the better.
Julian?
Yeah, and I'm really annoyed about the supermarkets, because we were all given a rates holiday and the Chancellor was very quick to help us out. Now, I get it for shops that are closed. The supermarkets have got customers queuing around the block. Why have they had a rates holiday? Hundreds of millions of pounds a year. Maybe they should refund their rates bill. And while we're talking about handouts, what about tax avoiders? Elbowing their way to the front of the queue for handouts when they're not paying their taxes. I have a real problem with that, and I bet you most of the population do as well.
I'm sure. I expect that this thing is going to melt in a moment, so I'm going to follow up on those questions. Francis, there's a question for you, but I'm also going to put it to Ben as well. There's research that suggests, and I'm afraid the research is not quoted, but there's research that suggests that in the UK, just 11% of people are isolating when told to do so. This was, I guess, the point I was trying to tickle towards with Ben earlier. The 11% of people are isolating when told to do so. Does this mean that the incentives for employees to stay at home when they can't get work are not enough?
Well, I think people may know the TUC has been campaigning ever since March that £96 a week statutory sick pay is not enough. And on top of that, of course, we've got millions of workers who don't earn enough to even qualify for that. Very often doing more than one job on very, very low pay, 0 hours contracts. So we need to sort this out. And it's a shame it took a pandemic in a way to highlight this as a problem. But for sure, I think we need to recognise it's not like people out there are bad. You know, people are trying to make the best decisions they can in really, really difficult circumstances. And if we're honest, if we went around this panel and you were asked to choose between feeding your kids or doing the right thing and staying at home, what would your moral choice be?
And can I ask you, just sort of in the here and now, Francis, you know, I expect that if we were having this conversation in the last week of March, beginning of April, there would be a frenzy of conversations that you were having with Treasury, with Bays. Is that happening again now, or are you getting the same engagement now?
Yeah, we are. We meet regularly, we discuss regularly, including, I have to say, my strong advice to the Chancellor was on something for something on furlough, that let's not forget this isn't government money, this is our money. It's great to see firms like Doc Martens saying, you know, we didn't need it, we're going to give it back. But I think that sense that Julian outlined, that, you know, if we are going to support business, which of course we should, but there should be some sense of what do we think good business looks like? What are the behaviours that we want to see? Nothing fancy, but it seems to me that, you know, it's not okay to be putting shed loads of money out to shareholders at a time when you're collecting money from the taxpayer. So
sorry, Francis.
You know,
Forgive me, Francis. I was actually just trying to go after particularly this test, trace and isolate issue, because if we're rolling out mass testing, if you are beginning to see much higher infection rates, the mathematical logic of that would lead to much larger numbers of people being expected to isolate, and there's a funding requirement for them individually and socially. And I'm just interested to know whether in conversations with Treasury and Bays you feel as though you're making any progress on that particular issue.
I think we haven't made progress with the government, but we've got many more voices, including, I have to say, Dido Harding, who you're talking to later, saying this has got to improve. The system won't work unless people don't have to face financial hardship in order to do the right thing. It's as simple as that. And as we've learned in so many areas, if you dither and delay, actually, in the long run, we're costing ourselves more.
Right.
If people can't afford to do the right thing, the virus will spread more than it should. We can't target in quite the same way to get control of this virus. So it's a worthwhile investment to make sure that nobody is put into financial hardship.
Right. But Ben, can I just ask you, just on the data there, does that ring true to you? There's this
It
number of
sounds a
11%.
bit extreme, I think, because when we've polled people, as I say, we've got 73% who say that they're doing it nearly all the time. Now, of course, that if you want to split it down, you may get. I don't think I did the 11% survey, so I think there's degrees of compliance, because if you go for a walk on your own and you're meant to be self-isolating, and you literally don't come within 20 feet of anybody else, the chances are actually pretty slim. And I think most people do want to do the right thing. I think, in fairness, we do have the lowest sick pay, I think, in the entire OECD. We're an absolute outlier on it. Our benefits aren't the most generous, but this is really extreme. So there is clearly something there, and the public would support people getting more sick pay.
Right.
But actually, on compliance, I'm still with the view that the public broadly is behind the measures that are necessary and has made and will make major sacrifices. The public wants to do what is necessary to control this, and we can keep focusing on the people not being perfect. Nobody is, but actually, it's still amazing the equanimity of spirit that you can see out there, quite frankly.
All right. I said as we got to the end that we wouldn't allow the US presidential election to go by and to get you, the chief executive of Ipsos Mori, not to give us a poll. Now, we know all the caveats. Heaven knows we've lived with the consequences of the caveats. What do you think, Ben, you're likely to see in the US?
Well, I mean, we've only got Trump at a 20% chance at best, and that includes legal chicanery. So you should go to sleep tonight, and you should wake up with Joe Biden as president sometime later tomorrow. But things happen. I think I'm just hoping that the American pollsters have learned, as the British pollsters have, from their previous experiences, and that some of the polling that we're seeing in these electoral college seats, which ultimately decide what happens, is much better than last time. But the popular vote, he's 8% ahead. Biden will win the popular vote. There is absolutely no doubt about that. It's just the route through the electoral college. There is some noise in the data in the Sun Belt. If you want to be, most people on this call and most people in Britain are against Donald Trump. But if you are a Trump fan, then there is still some hope in the Sun Belt.
All right. And Ben, can you just provide us all some practical advice? Because we'd like to sound, A, intelligent, and B, cogent at sort of breakfast time tomorrow morning. What time are you going to bed and what time are you getting up?
I am not actually going to stay awake all night and watch this one. I'm going to leave it to my much better informed American colleagues who are down with the data. So I'm going to try and sleep in for as late as possible to not get dragged into all the excitement. The final thing I would say is, because humanity tends to see patterns and repeat previous, we always fight the last war. So we were all blindsided by Trump last time, and there is just a chance we'll be blindsided by the size of the Biden victory this time.
Right. Okay. All right. Good. Well, we will. The truth is, we're all back here tomorrow. So if there does turn out to be a Biden triumph, a blue wave, we'll say, we heard that first from Ben Page.
Okay. Right.
I'm going to come back, if I might, just in the final moments to you, Josh, because I want to change gear in one sense. 2021, you can see, is going to have a, colossally difficult set of pressures on business. We're going to see, and we're already seeing, increases in unemployment. We saw, as Francis was saying, that unemployment is tipped towards particular people, younger people. It skews female. And as we've seen, it also skews in terms of the geography of the country. And I suppose it feels to me as though it's in danger of being out of touch to talk about expectations of business leaders, the promise of building back better, without being realistic about the fact that in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, there was a massive hit to the reputation of business. When you go into a recession, more likely than not, you're going to see that again. And when you think from the CBI's point of view, how you support business, how you support companies in this issue of trust, what do you think 2021 has in store?
Well, I think it's more what we need to make happen in 2021. I think if we think about what we've heard today, we've heard massive commitments. I think we have to believe that commitment from business, the businesses Julian's working with, Vodafone, so many others, the data we've had from the polling. So let's believe that and let's hold on to that. We've had massive disruption, but out of disruption can come rebirth, can come opportunity. So we've got to seize that. And as we head into 2021, yes, individual businesses committing, and so many are, signing the charter, doing the dozens of other things that they're doing, really, really important. But at the heart of it, this question about trust won't go away until we tackle inequality. Inequality causes anger, rightly. Anger needs a target. That target will be business, will be government, will be other organisations. So this isn't about going on broadcast and winning the argument. This is actually about rolling up our sleeves and tackling the issue. And utterly concur with Francis. What's the CBI's job? CBI's job is to get business and government and other organisations working together because that improves outcomes in communities. Let's make 2021 the year where that really happens. We have both called for an economic commission where unions, business, government, society come together and say, what do we need to do together to tackle the systemic problems that we face? That's the single biggest thing that we can do to tackle the inequality, and that will improve the reputation of business, the reputation of government, and give us all something to shout about.
It's so interesting, Josh. I can't work out whether the fact that this conference happens at the most challenging time I can remember for business is like a difficult thing or just makes it so interesting. So it's possibly both.
One day we'll know in retrospect.
Can I say a huge thank you to Helen Lamprell from Vodafone UK, of course to you, Francis O'Grady of the TUC, great to see you, Ben Page, Chief Exec of Ipsos Mori, and Julian Richer, it's great to see you here. Josh Hardy, thanks so much. The next session, which I hope you'll stay tuned into because we recorded, this Carolina Fairburn and Bernard Looney and I recorded, is about possibly one of the most interesting business stories happening in this country today. Bernard Looney is the chief executive of BP, and he has been leading that company on what by any measure is a fundamental change, a change in the nature of the BP in the context of the energy transition. Please do stay and watch. We look forward to seeing you again later in the afternoon. But next is Bernard Looney, the Chief Exec of BP. Thanks for watching.